11 years ago, when I was 14, my family and I took a vacation to our summer cabin up in Wyoming. It was a yearly retreat done right before school started. My dad and his brother would fish, while I spent most of the time with my brother and cousin in the lake that was about half a mile or so from the cabin. The family cabin was located just outside the small town of Elk Grove, which had a population no more than 300 people. I ventured into town sometimes on my bike when I get bored up at the cabin, and there was never anything inspiring about it. This area was located in western Wyoming, so not terribly far from the Idaho border. I wasn't from Wyoming, and instead a neighboring state, so I don't know much about their geography, except one year we did drive a bit up north to Yellowstone. That's neither here nor there though. What this is a story about is an event that happened around August 11th and 12th, 1993. We had just arrived, maybe a day or so before, at the cabin. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. We ventured into town, ate some McDonald's, got some groceries, and spent the next couple days getting settled in the cabin. Dad readied to go fishing, while we swam, and pretty much just enjoyed the solitude. Certainly, the quietness was relished, especially since we did not get much of that back home in Salt Lake City. On August 10th, which was a Sunday, I decided to ride my bike down to Elk Grove. I was bored, and my brother was busy watching TV, even though the reception was something terrible, which had not been the case in years prior. So, I thought it would be fun to hit up the town, and maybe find something better to do. Elk Grove, as I mentioned, was hardly massive, and on a Sunday, the town was pretty much dead. As I rode through the streets though, something felt off. I could not put my finger on it at the time, but in retrospect, there was something going on that I could not comprehend, at the time anyway. I stopped off at a store which was open, and grabbed a shake. It was hot out, at least for western Wyoming, 80s if I recall, and as I sat down to have the shake and cool off, I could not help but listen to the older men complain about the heat. Both had to have been in their 60s, and certainly were ranchers. Probably had not ever ventured outside of the state in their entire lives, but they seemed like decent enough folk, and as someone who enjoyed people watching, the two's mannerisms and rough voice helped to cure my boredom. Soon though, their conversation turned from the heat to something else. The rash of dead horses dotting the area. At least a dozen, one of the men said, had died since July, and there was no explanation. The other questioned whether they were being poisoned by punk kids from the city. The city, of course, being Rock Springs, which was a couple hours south. It was an interesting, if not a bit disturbing, conversation. The first man, the one who instigated the conversation, did not seem to buy his reasoning, and mentioned whether it was tied to the lights in the sky. That piqued my 13-year-old interest. Lights in the sky. I wanted to ask, but felt like it would be too intrusive to do so. I hoped their discussion would answer my questions. It really didn't, but I did glean enough from it to freak myself out a bit. Apparently, over the course of a month or so, odd lights had started appearing in the sky at night. Some locals questioned if it was a plane or a government experiment, but authorities never had a serviceable answer. It certainly was not tied to the Air Force, who operated a base close to the Colorado border, near Cheyenne, on the other side of the state, and there was not much air traffic coming into this area of Wyoming, which made things the odder. The men discussed how a haunting buzz would often accompany the lights, and that they would vanish just as quickly as they appeared. Whatever it was, no one of the older ranchers said, had an explanation. After a bit, once I finished my shake, I got back on my bike and rode up Main Street and back toward the cabin. Now though, I was more aware of my surroundings and, for the first time in a long time, realized at just how quiet everything was. Sure, there was quietness, but this was different. I did not catch it at first, but on the ride back to the cabin, it finally hit me. I heard no animals at all. Generally, when you're in the wild, you can hear something, even if it's far off in the distance. It could be a bird or a coyote or even a bear. But as I got further away from town, and more secluded, it was eerily quiet. When I got back to the cabin, I mentioned this to my mom, and she just shrugged. That night, I decided I was going to stay up and see if I could spot the lights those two ranchers spoke about. So, I waited for everyone to fall asleep, and I snuck outside, bringing with me a pillow and my iPod. Then I sat on the porch and watched the black sky for the remainder of the night. If there were lights, I did not see them. Around 3 o'clock, I gave up and went to bed. Monday morning came, and I went back into town. This time, I was hoping to hear more about the lights in the sky. So, I rode my bike on down to Main, which was the busiest part of Elk Grove, and again, people watched. As I pulled up to sit down on the steps of the library, which sat across the street from the bank, I could not help but notice the front page of that day's newspaper. Mysterious lights baffle town. I reached into my pocket, pulled out 75 cents, and bought the paper. Right there, on the front page, was a photo, snapped by a local resident, of these mysterious lights. It wasn't the best quality, but you could certainly see something, and that alone gave me the chills. Right under that was an article about the death of horses, now 5 more. What was going on here? I sat there on the steps of the library, reading this article. The lights had been increasing in frequency in the last month, and no one had an explanation for any of it. There was even a quote from a retired general who said he had never experienced anything like this before. Reading the article, I overheard 2 ladies, housewives no doubt, discussing it. One of the women went by Eve, so that's what her friend called her, short for Evelyn maybe, and I never did catch the other's name, but they spoke of the lights too. Johnny, Eve's husband, had witnessed them the night before last, right over the mountain ridge, and they stayed there with their indescribable humming for a good 15 minutes before they just disappeared. Eve spoke about how Lester, their dog, spent the entire time crazily barking at the night sky. Whatever it was, a military experiment or something more, it had gripped this small western Wyoming town. Everyone was talking about it. I could hear multiple conversations as I rode through the town and back up into the foothills above it where my family's cabin was located. When I returned, I showed my mother the newspaper. She left it off. Just stories, she said. I rolled my eyes and felt I knew better. Of course I knew better. I had heard first-hand encounters. My dad was even less inclined to believe me, and so was my uncle. Neither cared, and said I watched too many sci-fi movies. My brother, who was a few years older than me, just said it was probably a weather balloon. But even though I had questions about what it could be, I had my doubts. There was something more sinister at play here. That night, we had hot dogs grilled over a fire in the backyard fire pit. They were yummy. Tuesday was the day we were going for a hike up one of the mountains around the cabin, so the family decided to call it a night to better rest for it. My brother and I shared a room. There was a TV in there that normally received good reception, but, as like the TV in the living room, it wasn't now. My brother cursed, not yet ready to go to bed, and fiddled with the antenna before conceding it was useless. Instead, he put on a movie, I think Spider-Man, and passed out about 30 minutes later. I laid there in the quiet cabin, watching the movie, thinking over the day's events. I was surprised no one else in my family thought this odd, and wondered if maybe I was overthinking everything. It was possible, after all. I had quite the imagination as a kid, and my dad was right. I did love sci-fi movies. Maybe it was nothing more than a natural phenomenon, something like an aurora borealis. As I finally started disbelieving my own stories, and closed my eyes to get some sleep, there was a loud rumble, and then a violent shake. It startled both me and my brother as we bolted out of bed. At first, I thought earthquake and shot for the desk in the corner of the room. But as the shaking continued and the rumble turned to a high-pitched and awful buzz, a sharp light cut through the night sky. Within seconds of the initial movement, the light became so bright that it looked like day had returned, filling the window and engulfing the room in it. I could hear my parents screaming to get under a desk or a table or in a doorway, and I was, as my brother shot toward the doorway of the bedroom. But that light, it was trance-inducing. I just stared as it blinded the window, making it impossible to see outside. I remember my brother screaming, "What is that?" and not having any response except a loud yell. 30 or so seconds later, the shaking became less constant, and the light outside the window went from a piercing yellow to a bright red. I still could not see much outside, and the shaking, mostly booms now, happened every 3 to 5 seconds. My parents finally made it into the room and were frantic about the whole thing. We were all confused, as no one knew exactly what was going on. All we could hear and feel were the rumbles, and whatever was causing that rumble also was painting the sky fire red and orange. I remember the entire family, including my uncle, aunt, and cousin, piling into the living room as this was going on, panicked and confused. My dad, maybe not thinking, opened the front door and we saw it. The sky was lit up in these oddly shaped lights, and the horizon was aglow in red. You could barely see anything beyond the blistering lights, but there was something out there. There was something terrible out there. My mom, grabbing my dad, yelled at him to shut the door, which he did. Eventually, as abruptly as it started, the rumbling stopped, and whatever was out there passed, but its carnage remained. It was an inferno. The entire sky lit up in fire. Sirens could be heard off in the distance. It was then that I realized whatever had happened occurred right over Elk Grove. I went back into my bedroom and quickly grabbed one of my disposable cameras. I snapped one photo before my mom pulled me back inside the cabin. The lights I captured were gone within seconds. Here is the photo I took. I apologize for the quality. It was done in haste and with a cheap, disposable camera. A short while later, as we watched the fire grow and wondered how we would get out of there, we heard a knock at the door. My dad answered and was called outside by a man I did not see. I tried peering through the window, but my mom hustled me away. All I remember seeing was what looked like a man in a military uniform. My dad was out there for a while, maybe 20 minutes, when he finally came in, looked at my mom and said, "Get your stuff, we gotta go, now." So we did. We quickly packed up, got into the car, and were escorted out of the area. Eventually, the car my dad, my uncle and his family followed, from behind, was following pulled over and waved my dad on, roughly 30 or so minutes from when we left the area. We then snaked through the western Rockies, up through Jackson, Wyoming, over into Idaho, and down into Utah. A trip home that normally took 3 or so hours now took all night. We eventually arrived back in Salt Lake 6 hours or so later. The entire car ride, no one said anything about what we had seen or what my dad was told. Even today, when I mention the events, my mom changes the subject or passively says it was a major wildfire. When I got home, I instantly began searching for news stories involving the area. Nothing. Not one story about the town or the fire. Over time, within a couple of weeks, any mention of the town seemed to disappear from the internet. I kept looking and searching, and it was like it never existed. When I brought this attention to my brother, he would just shrug, and my mom told me to let it go. Eventually, as I finally unpacked all my things, I came across the front page of the newspaper I bought the day before everything unfolded. It was the only thing that made Elk Grove seem real, proving to me it was not a dream. To my knowledge, this is the only thing that exists from this town. I've researched this town for 10 years and haven't found anything. The only evidence of this town existing is that newspaper and the remains of it as seen on Google Maps, which does not show much. Last month, I decided to venture up to Elk Grove. It was the first time I had gotten the nerve to do so. I had my friend tag along. Thing is, there is no exit or sign to indicate where the town is. I was able to find it on Google Maps after hours of searching, but to actually find the town in person was pretty much impossible. There are no roads that connect to it anymore, and though I know the general area, to travel by foot or bike would prove too dangerous. In 2007, my dad died of a heart attack. With him went the only explanation, from what I can tell, of that night. My mom, if she knows, is not speaking. For now, the town of Elk Grove, Wyoming, remains a great mystery. What happened to it, whether aliens or something else, will probably never be known. Elk Grove is the town that just disappeared. Sometime during the night of August 16th, 1952, the small town of Ashley, Kansas, ceased to exist. At 3:28 a.m. on August 17th, 1952, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake was measured by the United States Geological Survey. The earthquake itself was felt throughout the state and most of the Midwest. The epicenter was determined to be directly under Ashley, Kansas. When state law enforcement arrived at what should have been the outskirts of the farming community, they found a smoldering, burning fissure in the earth measuring 1,000 yards in length and approximately 500 yards in width. The depth of the fissure was never determined. After 12 days, the statewide and local search for the missing 679 residents of Ashley, Kansas was called off by the Kansas state government at 9:15 p.m. on the night of August 29th, 1952. All 679 residents were assumed to be dead. At 2:27 a.m. on August 30th, 1952, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake was measured by the United States Geological Survey. The epicenter was situated under what used to be the location of Ashley, Kansas. When law enforcement investigated at 5:42 a.m., they reported that the fissure in the earth had closed. In the 8 days leading up to the disappearance of the town and its 679 residents, bizarre and unexplainable events were reported by dozens of residents in Ashley, Kansas, and law enforcement from the surrounding area. On the evening of August 8th, 1952, at 7:13 p.m., a resident by the name of Gabriel Jonathan reported a strange sight in the sky above Ashley. The town itself, having no official branch of law enforcement, called into the police station of the neighboring town of Hayes. Gabriel reported what appeared to be a small, black opening in the sky. Within the next 15 minutes, the Hayes police station became overwhelmed with dozens of phone calls, all reporting the same phenomenon. The phenomenon was never reported by any neighboring communities. A decision was made to send a trooper to Ashley to investigate the matter the following morning. At 7:54 a.m. on the morning of August 9th, 1952, Hayes police officer Alan Mace radioed the Hayes police station. He reported that, despite following the one-way road leading into Ashley, he had become lost. According to his report, the road continued along its normal path, but somehow ended up back in Hayes. Officer Mace went on to add that the road never curved or bent in any direction. At 9:15 a.m., 7 of the town's 10 police cars were sent to investigate the situation, and all members of the team came to the same conclusion. The only road leading into Ashley stopped leading into Ashley, but instead led back to Hayes. Phone calls continued to pour into the Hayes police station, all reporting that the black opening in the sky continued to grow in size. All callers were advised to remain inside and not travel outside unless absolutely necessary. At 8:17 p.m., Mrs. Elaine Cantor reported her neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Milton, and their 2 children, Jeffrey and Brooke, missing. According to Mrs. Cantor's phone call, the Miltons attempted to leave town in their family car earlier in the evening. They never returned. Law enforcement officials from Hayes never reported the car or individuals coming up the one-way road. At 7:38 a.m. on the morning of August 10th, 1952, phone calls from Ashley into the Hayes police station reported that the town was in total darkness. The sun had never risen. At 10:15 a.m., at the request of Hayes law enforcement, a helicopter from Topeka, Kansas, flew over the region in which Ashley, Kansas stood. The town was never observed from the air. At 12:43 p.m. on the afternoon of August 11th, 1952, Miss Phoebe Danieluski called into the Hayes police station. She reported that her daughter, Erica, had begun to have conversations with her father, who died 3 years prior in a drunk driving accident. To add to her concern, Miss Danieluski reported that Erica was attempting to go outside into the dark to join them. Over the course of the next 12 hours, a reported 329 phone calls were placed into the Hayes police station, all describing similar phenomenon, with the children of the town. The following morning of August 12, 1952, the situation became dire. During the middle of the night, all 217 children in the town of Ashley, Kansas, disappeared. A reported 421 phone calls were placed into the Hays Police Department. Unable to be of any useful assistance, Hays law enforcement instructed all callers to remain inside and to avoid any and all attempts at finding the missing children. At 5:19 p.m. on the evening of August 14, 1952, Ashley elderly man Scott Luntz reported a growing, distant fire to the south. According to his description, the fire seemed to turn the distant black into bright and orange that seemed to extend high into the sky. Throughout the rest of the day, calls continued in, stating that the fire, in addition to moving north, now seemed to come out of the black sky. No fire was ever witnessed by any of the neighboring communities or law enforcement officials. The reports continued until 12:09 a.m. on the morning of August 14, 1952. The last phone call, placed by a Mr. Benjamin Endicott, reported that the fire in the sky had grown so intense that it began to appear as daytime over the town. The phone call ended abruptly. From the phone call placed by Benjamin Sherman Endicott, "Just hold on, wait." Continued silence. Yeah, I see something. It's to the south, it looks like." End phone call. The next phone call would not be placed until the following evening. The following is the entire transcript of the final phone call to be received by the Hays Police Department out of the town of Ashley, Kansas. It was placed at 9:46 p.m. on the evening of August 15, 1952. In this recorded phone call, the officer on duty is Officer Peter Welsh. The caller has been identified as Miss April Foster. Begin phone call. Officer Welsh, Hays Police Department. Muffled static. Hello? Yes, hello. Ma'am, who am I speaking with? My name is April Foster. Please, sir, please help me. What is happening, ma'am? Last night they came back. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to... Last night they came back. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down and speak clearly. What happened? Who came back? Everyone. Everyone? They all came in the fire. What do you mean, everyone? My son. I saw my son last night. He was walking down the street. He was burned. Jesus Christ, he was burned. Ma'am, he died last year. I raised him since he was a baby. It was just me and him. I told him to watch for cars when he rode his bike, but he never wanted to listen. Ma'am, what you're saying is not making any sense. You said everyone came back. Are you fucking listening to me? Everyone. Everyone came back. Everyone who died or went missing, they're back. And they're looking for us. He said, Mommy, I'm okay now, see? I can walk again. Where are you, Mommy? I want to see you. Ma'am, where are you now? Are you safe? I'm hiding, just like everyone else. We saw them coming through the fields and some people opened their doors for them. God, the screaming. I don't know what happened to them, but their houses caught fire and they caved in. I have my curtains drawn. I'm hiding in the closet right now and... Ma'am, is everything alright? Are you okay? Ma'am. Oh my God. Ma'am. Something just came in. Ma'am, stay as quiet as you can. Don't make a sound. He came inside. Stay absolutely still. Don't leave. Stay quiet. Ma'am. End phone call. The following morning, at 6:55 a.m., the law enforcement officials of the Hays Police Department arrived at the location of Ashley, Kansas. A smoldering, burning fissure in the earth was all that remained. There are documents kept in Russian monasteries about demonic kidnappings, tracing back to at least the 1800s. Children disappearing out of trace while traveling between villages, etc. Some were saved and found days later due to the intervention of monks and saints and prayers of entire communities. Surviving children reported being taken by entities fast as the wind and taken to cottages deep within woods, where they were chained and fed by some sort of witches. Those that survived refused to eat. Anyhow, these demonic kidnappings were physical and real, reported by entire villages with living witnesses. Worth of mentioning is that those cottages were later not found by villagers. They apparently never existed in physical reality. Reports were kept in monasteries and never published. Some were found and released, but they remain obscure. Some of the stories are more horrifying than any movie, with boys being under demonic control for years, while being presumed dead and missing. They were forced to obey demonic entities and perform various tasks each day and night. But I digress. Point being, these disappearances today could very well be the same, happen in front of everyone's nose, and no one would know. Not sure how paranormal this is, but it's something that came to mind. B11. Live on a cul-de-sac in the suburbs. Pretty quiet life. One day, playing outside with my sister, throwing frisbee back and forth or whatever. Just the two of us, around an hour before sunset, so it's getting dark. Suddenly hear the strangest sound from nearby woods. It was probably less than half a mile away. It was very loud, echoed throughout the entire neighborhood. Sounded like those metallic, magnetic toy beads that would vibrate in your hand, only on a much larger scale. I would describe it as a deep, metallic vibration that could be felt in your chest. Sound went off maybe 2 or 3 times. My sister and I are just frozen, looking at each other in shock. Maybe a few seconds after the sound stops, a fully grown buck bolts out of the woods and nearly runs me over. I mean, this thing was within arm's length of me. I fall right on my back, get the wind knocked out of me, and hit my head on the ground. The sound is heard again from the woods, and my sister, who was 9 at the time, screams bloody murder. I collect myself, and we go inside. My sister is hysterical, but she calms down eventually. No other spooky business that day. We kind of just forgot about it for a couple years. It wasn't until I was like 20 or something that I brought it up, asking if she remembered that. When I did, I swear all the color left her face. Apparently, when I was on the ground, 3 more deer ran past our neighbor's home, away from the woods. Only they were being chased by something that was on 2 legs. It was thin, tall, and fast. I tried to press my sister for more details on what it looked like, but she was visibly shaking, just talking about it, and refused. Feel kind of bad now that she kept it to herself for so long. I don't know. Story I heard from my granduncle. Man has seen some weird stuff over the years, some of which I've also seen. This is one of the more subtle stories, but still gives me the chills. B granduncle. Vacation in Tuscany. Get to this cozy cottage style Airbnb. Nice view, comfortable place, but missing 1 bed. Decides to take one for the team and sleep on couch. That night, lying on couch, getting ready to sleep. Hears sounds coming from past doorway, leading to kitchen. Assumes it's one of my aunts or something. Something still feels off, so squints at the doorway. Watches as a figure walks past the doorway. Old man, pale as hell. Permanent, shit-eating grin, plastered on his face. Fuck this shit. Short of losing his shit, kinda hunkers down and starts praying as a last resort. Eventually falls asleep. Granduncle never brings us up for the rest of the stay at the Airbnb. Eventually, we're about to leave. He asked the owner, an elderly lady, about it. That face when she says it was probably her husband. That face when said husband has been dead for the past decade.